The Political Rabbit presents.
A recent scientific study shows that the human brain might be hardwired to our faith. Watch.
Faith into murky waters to find a child missing for days. 11-year-old Nadia Bloom disappeared last Friday near Lake Jessup in Florida. Early efforts to find her were fruitless until one of the rescuers, James King, set out on his own, trusting he was going in the right direction. In an extraordinary interview, King told CNN today that God led him directly to the girl and that finding her was no surprise.
And in some cases, when there's water in front and there's water to the left and water to the right and trees and brush and bushes, and I said, which way to go? And I looked at it and he said, go that way. And I'm looking at water and I said, Lord, you sure? And he said, I got you.
Which leads us to the facts of faith, the science of prayer. When some say it is all in your head, maybe they're right. Here's CNN's Dr. Sanjay Gupta.
Generations of people believing in God. Generations of skeptics trying to figure out why. Now, hard science is taking a hard look, exploring the brain to see whether human beings are hardwired for faith. And astoundingly, the answer may be yes.
The brain is set up in such a way that it's very easy for us to have religious and spiritual beliefs and experiences and make religion and spirituality a part of our lives.
Dr. Andrew Newberg is a pioneer in a new field called neurotheology, conducting groundbreaking studies of brain activity.
A wonderful window, so to speak, into understanding how religion and spirituality affect human beings.
Using SPECT imaging, a brain scanning technology, Newberg has examined nuns deep in prayer, Tibetan Buddhists meditating, Pentecostal Christians speaking in tongues. No matter what the religion, no matter what the form of worship, prayer makes certain regions of the brain light up in a special and unique way. Like this, the frontal lobe, right behind the forehead, focuses concentration. The limbic system deep in the center triggers feelings of awe and joy. The parietal lobe at the back of the brain brings on that feeling of becoming part of something greater than oneself. Dr. Newberg says the faithful see this as confirmation that God has designed us to believe.
The nuns took a look at those scans and said, this is great. It makes sense to them. If God's up there and we're down here, obviously there has to be some conduit through which we understand God.
Perhaps, but secular critics say the new research leaves many unanswered questions.
In terms of understanding the fundamental nature of religious beliefs, why people have them, to what purpose they serve, I don't think it's going to give us very much insight.
So for scientists, the question of why we believe still remains a mystery. The answer, perhaps an eternity away. Dr. Sanjay Gupta, CNN, Los Angeles.
Up next, more on the science of prayer, how scholars explain the mysterious power of focusing on your faith when we come back. Joining me right now from Philadelphia is Dr. Andrew Newberg, the director and co-founder of the Center for Spirituality and the Neurosciences at the University of Pennsylvania. You saw him a moment ago in Sanjay's piece. We should mention Dr. Newberg is also a co-author of How God Changes Your Brain. And also with us is Wendy Kodge, who is Associate Professor of Sociology at Brandeis University, joining us as well to talk about this. Dr. Newberg, let's talk a little bit. I want to expand on I think, some of what you told Sanjay.
Sure.
You've done research specifically into what happens in a person's brain when they pray. And it's really something rather unique, isn't it? Explain it.
Well, absolutely. It's something that actually activates many different parts of the brain. It affects our emotional parts of the brain, the logical parts of the brain, the parts of the brain that help us to feel connected to our universe, to God. And therefore, it is really a buzz of activity. It really makes us feel very energized, and I think that's part of why it's such a powerful experience for people.
And you're saying, I guess there's actually part of the brain that reacts in a certain unique way also when somebody is having kind of a religious experience, which I think is fascinating. Give us some examples of where you have seen this.
Well, one of the most important areas is a part of the brain called the parietal lobe, and it's located in the back part of the brain. And this is a part of the brain that normally helps us to create a sense of ourself and a connection of that self to the world. When we've studied people in deep practices like prayer or meditation, there's a decrease in this area, and it makes a lot of sense that they would have a sense where they lose their sense of self, they lose their sense of space and time, they feel a connectedness with God that is so overwhelming and so powerful. And I think that this is a very important part of the kinds of experiences that they have. It also affects the emotional parts of the brain, a part of the brain called the limbic system, because these are deeply emotional experiences for people. They have immense joy, immense love, immense compassion, and it has a tremendous effect not only for them in the moment, but it exists throughout their entire lives.
And Professor Kaj, let me take this a step further and look at whether one person's prayer can actually affect reality in some way. Heal the sick, for example. I think maybe most people don't necessarily believe that prayer could, say, cure cancer, but there have been studies, specific scientific studies, looking at this. Explain what they are and what they found.
Yes, since 1965, there have been about 16 studies that tried to look at the effects that prayer has on people who are being prayed for, but specifically when those people don't know that they're being prayed for. These are double-blind clinical trials of intercessory prayer. The results are mixed, but it's generally seen to be the case that it's hard to show scientifically that the prayers of one person have an effect on someone else, especially when they don't know that they're being prayed for.
Well, I guess that's my question, too, to both of you. And Dr. Newberg, you pick up on this, too.
Sure.
This isn't exactly an area that lends itself to scientific research, is it?
No, it's a very complicated process. And, of course, a lot of the studies just mentioned, the question that you really have is, are they the kind of prayer that people are really doing? When you're involved in a study, you're given a name, you're praying for a name. Very different than when you might be praying for your parent or your child or your loved one, where theoretically there may be much greater effects. So it's always hard to know how to study these kinds of questions. And it's a real challenge for scientists, including myself, to figure out the best ways of trying to make some kind of measurement and try to understand this a little bit better.
And evaluate it. Go ahead, Professor.
I think that's exactly right, because so much of prayer takes place in context with families and with communities, and it's really hard to capture the context in which those prayers happen, in addition to the fact that not all prayer is about making a request or a petition of God. In a study that I did looking at prayers in hospital prayer books, many people were simply thanking God or accepting gratitude, so it's much more complicated.
Well, let me ask you to follow up on that, because I thought this was really interesting. You studied, I think, 500 prayers to find out what specifically people were praying about. And what did you find?
That's right. I was looking at prayers that people had written in prayer books that are inside of the Johns Hopkins Hospital. And what I found after looking at about 500 prayers was that about a third of people were praying prayers of thanks, prayers of gratitude. About a third of people were petitioning God in some way, and about a third were doing both thanking and petitioning. So the first important point to realize is that there's a lot of thanks and gratitude. The second important point is when we looked at the petitions, we found that they weren't always asking for specific things. People were not saying, God, please fix my knee. People were asking for support, they were asking for blessings, they were asking for guidance in a much more general, sort of psychologically supportive way in the requests they were making.
Well, it's a really interesting field, and I know you both are breaking new ground. Dr. Newberg and Professor Kaj, thank you so much for being with us. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
The question of the day is, why did our brain evolve to make it easy for us to have faith or to believe there's a God up there? For a believer, this is really simple. God tuned our brain to make it easy for us to believe in Him, or to have faith. But for you skeptics, what do you think? YouTube, you decide.